All right, welcome to the Thursday night live stream here at On Texas Football. I'm Jeff Howe, joined by lifetime Longhorn Marcus Myers. A little bit of a lineup change. The coach Bob Shipley could not be with us tonight. Also, lifetime Longhorn Rod Babers. Rod and I switched. Rod was on the Wednesday night live stream with CJ last night. But we'll be taking your questions. Super chats jump to the front of the line. I want to thank our title sponsor for this live stream, this edition of On Texas Football. That's our friends at Von Lane. We'll tell you more about Von Lane here in a little bit. Marcus, I've talked a lot about this, and I'll give you the floor. Wow. We'd heard some rumblings that there were going to be changes on the defensive staff. I'll be honest. Yeah. I didn't see this one coming until it was headed down the pike. Pete Kwiatkowski out, Will Muschamp in, Duane Akina also on his way out. Your thoughts, Marcus, on a crazy day on the 40?
Crazy day indeed, man, and glad to be on here with you, Jeff. I was a little under the weather, so I started taking some meds and got my tea here. I'm ready to go, man, because to your point, fired up about it. Been talking with some friends and teammates, for the majority of the day on the news since it happened. First and foremost, love the job that PK did here. I think there was just some things that, myself included, was hoping to see a little bit differently at times, and so, we'll get into all of it. I'm sure people have, lots of thoughts on it. But one of the things that's a big takeaway for me, Jeff, is it's a sign of Sark pushing the chips in the middle in a different way than we've seen him do to this point. As much as people want to discuss, what they feel the right decision point should be, he's made a major shakeup. And it's one that I think can really serve the program well. Look, the guy is an incredible defensive mind. He's an incredible teacher of the game. He is a guy that will take your 3-star and get him performing like a 4 or 5 and make sure that the 5 performs, like an out of this world player. And so there's things that I've seen, him do over the years that just make sense. And so I think that can be complementary to whatever this team looks like on the offensive side of the ball. Even if you just talk about the practices alone, how much a guy like Arch Manning can learn having to face a Muschamp defense every day. This is a conference that he, pretty much grew up in, if you will, and is one that, Muschamp takes a lot of pride in. His defense is performing at a certain level with a certain level of intensity and a certain style. And I think that looks, is the look that maybe Sark is going for, a categorical switch from the way PK did things. And look, he did an amazing job in a number of games. But, if I'm honest, I don't really consider OU or A&M true SEC style offenses. They still have a Big 12, twinge to them, if you will. And I think what Sark realized is, hey, we got road trips to Knoxville and LSU next year. Of course, Ohio State is coming to town. And then at the end of the day, you want to be able to get into the SEC championship with a possible 4th meeting with Georgia in the last couple of years. You got to find a way to be able to change some things. And for all the conversation that has been, about what has happened in the trenches in some of those games, I can guarantee you a Will Muschamp coach defense shows up a little differently. So I know we got a lot to get to, and I have plenty more that I could expound upon, but that's kind of just my initial takeaways. I'm very excited about the move and think that when it's all said and done, and I say all said and done because I still think there are more changes that are going to happen on both sides of the ball, possibly even with personnel. So my encouragement to fans would be to continue to let this thing play out. I understand that we're not always that patient. And so, we'll get a ton of questions about any number of things and some, very strong opinions, and all, rightfully so. But I like the direction of things heading into the bowl game and then ultimately the offseason.
I like in this move. This to me is different than when Coach Muschamp came to Texas the first time, coming off the 07 season going into 08. It's different. This, Marcus, actually reminds me of a time you were on campus and you called it, I think you called it the worst offseason of your life. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you did. Going from 03 to 04. You played for Bull Reese. And I don't think anybody would say that the late, great Carl Bull Reese was a bad defensive coordinator. He wasn't. But I think at that time, kind of like PK, I think that defense, as it was, took you about as far as it was going to take you. And that was Mac's decision at that time. You know what? I need to do something else. At the time, it was Oklahoma. I need to do something to get us over this Oklahoma hump. We got to figure out Oklahoma if we're going to get over the hump and go compete for it and win a national championship. He brings in Greg Robinson. He brings in Dick Tomey. He establishes the not our standards. And you've talked about that offseason. A lot of guys have talked about that offseason, how that laid the groundwork for that 04 season and the 05 run of the national championship. I think, Marcus, that feels like what this is. And I said this towards the end of the season, the way Texas football under Sark was constructed, I think that model of it took you as far as it was going to take you. Now it's time to retool. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you got to retool it a little bit. And I think a lot of stuff in the chat, and rightfully so, talking about the Georgia problem. You got to get Georgia figured out. I think you just got to figure out, how do we get back to being a team that plays with a physical edge? Well, you want to get a coach in here that coaches with a physical edge, a maniacal edge, gives you an edge that you haven't had maybe since he left. Yeah, bringing in Will Muschamp is a really good way to start.
Yeah, man. I had to go back and do some research. Drew Kelson sent me this video interview that Muschamp did like 4 months ago, right? With the gentleman's name is escaping me right now. I'll think of it here in a little
Tim
bit.
Green, yeah, because
Tim Green. That's it. And I sat and watched that. And as I was watching it, people forget, like, Muschamp is 54 years old. He's younger than, or I'm sorry, he's a little bit older than Kirby, but not by much. When they were both, players at Georgia, he was a senior when Kirby was a freshman. So he still has plenty of juice in him. You can tell when he was talking, he had a lot of life about him. But as I was watching, it just reminded me, Muschamp as a defensive coordinator is an agent of chaos. And to me, like, that is a good thing. That is a way that you go into games looking to dictate how the offense is going to have to handle you, as opposed to you just solely reacting to what they're going to do. Even when I think about the young DBs that are out there, Cade Phillips is going to thrive under him. Someone, like a Grayson Littleton is going to continue to see his, stock rise. And then even when you talk about, the incoming signees, I mean, a Smoke Matthews is a perfect guy in a Will Muschamp type defense. And then when you get me talking about defensive line, linebackers, you name it, like, I go on for days about just permutations I can see of things. But again, just the simple stuff, man. Like, something tells me I don't think we're going to see Colin going backwards a whole lot, right? And we're going to see configurations of pass rushers that make a little bit more sense. Some guys, on receivers being a much stickier type of coverage, and not necessarily, I was joking with somebody earlier and told them, well, I can guarantee you won't see DBs playing 8 miles off anymore. And so it's stuff like that I'm excited about. Look, I'm not suggesting that as the end all be all. There are still things that have to be solved in the portal. I get it. And while I understand, a number of people's perspective is PK isn't the problem. Maybe he wasn't the problem, but was he the ultimate solution? If the goal is to win all the games, and you have an opportunity to get a guy like Muschamp, especially now you're in a 9-game SEC season. Again, I can't think of somebody I would want to trust more, knowing that, at least for this very next season, you got to go to Knoxville and Baton Rouge. Most likely both of those games will be at night. I can't think of a defensive coordinator I would trust more.
And I think I'll just say this up front, Marcus. I was on our, we went live earlier today, and myself, CJ, Rod, Jerry, were part of that. And I didn't mention this there, but as I've had a time to let this settle in, there's no guarantee that this is going to work. There's Absolutely. No guarantee that this is going to be what puts Texas over the top. But that's why I think it's worth reinforcing. This is Sark making the call. Hey, as it was built, wasn't going to get us where we needed to go. And maybe this isn't it, but this is him making that decision. Marcus, I want to talk about it from this standpoint, though, because now the counterpoint to everybody, well, okay, if the defense wasn't the problem, why aren't you making any changes on the offensive side of the ball? Mm-hmm. Well, to your point, I don't know that we're done seeing changes on offense. Now, I'm not saying that Sark's going to go hire an offensive coordinator, because I think until he gets it out of his system to where he feels like he doesn't need to have the call sheet in his hand on game day to be whole, there's no point in talking about hiring an offensive coordinator or play caller, Marcus, because he's not going to do it until he gets it completely out of his system. So I think there could be changes coming on offense, but I don't think that's going to be one of them.
Yeah, and there's some changes that have already been made. And again, I have a group chat with a bunch of buddies, and I think I said something to the effect in one of them today is like, hey, someone was, they were saying essentially Sark needs to look himself in the mirror and be accountable. Who are any of us to say he's not doing that, right? And further to that, when you think about these types of rooms, for one, none of us have been in a staff meeting with any of them, right? Unless there's somebody lurking in the chat, that's under an alias. I don't know anybody that has. And so I'm not sure anybody can, honestly say what some of those conversations, truly look like. That being said, when I think about someone like Will Muschamp, I don't imagine that kind of guy coming in and just sitting quiet on things. So even if you talk about a self-scout, I said this in the chat when you guys were on earlier, self-scouting just took a huge upgrade, right? Like Muschamp can pick this offense apart every which way necessary, has already been watching it, I'm sure, and has plenty of thoughts. But again, in practice, we'll be able to, translate some of the stuff that he's seen on film to what could work better in games. That could in itself be an upgrade on the offensive side of the ball. But again, my thought process is still let it all shake out. We still got to get through, the rest of, these, I guess we're 7 days away from Christmas, and then in total, like 13 from the game itself. So you got to get through the game. The portal opens on the 2nd. I'm sure we're going to get a ton of portal questions still. Nothing can truly happen in the portal just yet, folks. And I text you earlier, Jeff, I'll try not to do it, but there's this component of things that you see a headline, you see something reported somewhere about dollar figures and what somebody was offered and that we let somebody walk. You don't know if any of that's true. And I'll be the first to tell you, just having some insight on a number of those things, most of it isn't, right? There's always more layers to the story. But that's the world that we're in. And I don't know. I'm excited about it. I do think that there are more changes to come. And I agree with you, Jeff. I am a very big, proponent of, like, once someone has kind of shown you the certain direction that they're going to go with certain things, believe them, and pounding the table for something categorically different is a bit, wild to me. And so I don't, again, I don't take issue with Sark calling plays. Some of my issue has been, the timing of some of them. We don't have to rehash all that today, but I just think having another voice in the room like a Will Muschamp can't be anything but beneficial.
You need, every coach needs a couple guys on staff that will speak up in a staff meeting and say, hey, coach, I don't think that's where I don't think that's right. Correct. I don't think that's what we need to do. And based on Will Muschamp's first tenure in Texas, he was a guy that, hey, at a staff meeting, if he felt like something was wrong, he would speak his mind. He would voice his opinion. And I don't think that's changed. And to your point, Marcus, I think that is Sark. Hey, sometimes looking in the mirror is saying and making changes is, you know what? I need somebody on this staff that can hold me accountable, that can tell me that will tell me when I'm wrong. That won't just tell me what I want to hear, what they think I want to hear. Tell me what I need to hear. So I'm with you. That's a big part of it. I know Will Muschamp's going to do that. We'll get back to it here in just a minute. We'll get to your super chats. But let's hear from a couple of our fine sponsors here at On Texas Football, including our title sponsor of tonight's live stream. That's our friends over at Von Lane. The holidays are here. Travel season is here. But it doesn't have to be stressful. Whether you're heading to Austin for Christmas celebration, New Year's trips, whatever it is, Von Lane makes getting there easy. You'll board in minutes at a hotel terminal located just minutes from your destination and settle into 22 oversized seats. More space, more comfort, no crowds. Enjoy Wi-Fi, snacks, beverages, and hot towel service on every trip. And on select routes, savor complimentary meal service delivered right to your seat. Von Lane takes the grind out of regional travel so you can focus on what really matters, the people and experiences waiting at the end of the ride. Book today at vonlane.com and use the code OTF25. That's OTF25 for $20 off your first ride. Von Lane, it's a private jet on wheels, now serving Austin, Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Plano, the Woodlands, Nashville, Memphis, Atlanta, and Knoxville. And let's thank you to our good friends over at Hayes City Store. There are very few restaurants, and when you go to them, right away, it's a special place, and Hayes City Store is one of those places. Scratch-made Texas comfort food is what they're all about. They got their famous truck stop enchiladas, their award-winning chicken fried steak, the homemade desserts. It's all good, and it's all made from scratch. They got live music 6 nights a week, 50 beer taps, ice-cold long necks, tasty margaritas. It's definitely one of my favorite spots in the area. They got 13 TVs in their ice house. That's a perfect game day setup. And if you're out there on Sunday, maybe catching some pro action in the ice house, make sure you check out that brunch menu they've got every Sunday from 10 to 3. Hayes City Store is dog friendly. They've got a tree net for the kids, plenty of room to run around. So gather up your whole crew and head on out to Hayes City Store for more information. Check out the website at hayescitystortx.com. Hayes City Store, it's uniquely Texas. All right, Marcus, let's get to Super Chats. Juan Garza, thank you for the Super Chat. He says, so what is going to happen with defensive pass game coordinator Gideon, Travaris Robinson, and what will happen to the defensive staff as a whole? Marcus, that's one thing that I don't know exactly how that's going to shake out yet, because the main thing we don't know, and look, Sark is scheduled to have a press conference tomorrow, kind of late morning, early afternoon, about lunchtime, around 11:15. Is Will Muschamp going to coach a position? And if he's going to coach a position, what position is that? Because that'll determine do you need to hire a safeties coach? Do you need to hire a linebackers coach? Will Johnny Nansen come back? Marcus, I don't want to say that the bowl game doesn't matter, but to me, it's kind of inconsequential. Like, hey, Johnny Nansen can call plays for the bowl game. This would not be the first time we've seen Texas have an interim defensive coordinator for a bowl game. We go back to that Alamo Bowl against Utah in 2019. Todd Orlando got fired. Craig Niver was the interim for the bowl game. And actually, that ended up working out really good for Texas. So, I don't know, maybe Johnny Nansen calls it for the bowl game. But as far as other staff moves, a lot of Blake Gideon smoke out there. Blake is the defensive coordinator at Georgia Tech. Travaris Robinson, who's the safeties coach at Georgia. He's been with Coach Muschamp, I think everywhere. Will has been at Florida, at Auburn, at South Carolina, and then at Georgia. So, he's obviously a name that's going to jump to the forefront. But, I think Marcus right now in the moment, I think we'll get some more clarity in the next, few hours and days. But right now, I think anything is, speculation by and large.
Yeah, I think the same, right? I imagine in my opinion, again, just kind of spitballing a bit here, excuse me, I imagine the bulk of the defensive staff is retained. He'd probably bring in somebody else. I could see him, maybe bring in some analysts that, he really liked at some different places, or, maybe even some, kind of rising star types, if you will, that, just maybe haven't fully gotten their shot. But, he spent a lot of time around the Georgia program the last several years. So probably has some connections there, and just over his time in coaching in general. So you're right. I think it's going to take some time for everything to shake out. I know everybody's going to want to know, what's going to happen right now. And, obviously that's just not something we can answer real time until some more, begins to unveil itself a bit more. But, it'll be, some exciting times, that's for sure. And, we'll see, how the bowl game looks at the very least. I think it's just a really great first opportunity for him up close and personal to be able to evaluate the guys that he's going to be, putting out there in the spring. So it'll be a fun, couple of weeks here for us.
Based on the last time Texas had an interim DC for a bowl game, and, that defensive staff that Tom Herman had, that was Todd Orlando's defensive staff, you knew there were going to be staff changes. And it became, Marcus, you were down there in San Antonio, right, for that game, I would imagine.
What year was that?
2019. So it would have been 19 going into New Year's Eve 2019 going into 2020.
I think so. I think I did.
It becomes a really emotional time, because those coaches, I mean, look, you've recruited these guys, you've established relationships, you've developed them, whatever it is. Even a guy like Marco Orfe that hasn't been here for a while. Mm-hmm. Some of those guys, they might, as of right now, they might not know what's next. So it becomes a very emotional time. And if you're looking for, is Texas going to be mentally invested in the bowl game? I think it is, because those coaches don't want to put, if someone end up looking for jobs, they don't want to put bad tape out there. If they go look for a job, they want to put their best foot forward and try to make a statement with their last chance against an opponent like Michigan that's a name opponent. So we'll see what happens with the bowl game. But Juan, thank you for the super chat. D Money, thank you for the super chat. So PK was a great coach for us, but the administration wasn't afraid to get someone better. This is my favorite coaching hire in the Sark era. Now Sark better get his offense straight. Marcus, I'll say that too. Pete Witkowski is not a bad defensive coordinator at all. I don't think he was the problem with this program. I don't think he's the reason why Texas didn't live up to expectations this year. But again, if it doesn't jibe with Sark's philosophy on this is what we need to do to get us to the next level. And on top of that too, we had heard rumblings for the better part of the last year and a half. It's not that PK hated being at Texas, but he really wanted to get back to the West Coast. Like that's
where I was about to go.
He's a Boise State guy. He's a UW for a long time. And, you've got a couple situations out there now. I know Oregon's looking for a defensive coordinator with Tosh Lupoy moving on. There's a lot of smoke about is DeAnton Lynn getting ready to move on from USC. So Lincoln Riley may have an opening for a defensive coordinator, and any of those programs will be lucky. And I think we'll be thankful to have PK. So it ends up being a chance where he can move on to what's next, and Sark can make a hire that he feels like upgrades the defense.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Jeff. That's kind of also what I was talking about in terms of what we'll never truly know, right? Like there may be this element of things where, there's been some signaling, by whomever that they may have an opening, and that may be something that PK would just prefer, right? I mean, to your point, there's a lot of conversation around Lynn potentially going back home to Penn State, where he had where he played, and then you'd have a perfect landing spot for PK there, and so those things aren't always, you're never going to explicitly come out and say those types of things, but I don't know. I struggle to see a ton of downside in the moment, right? We're extrapolating thoughts right now. Like we're literally just throwing stuff out there in terms of what we could see happening. And that's really a version of what we're always doing, right? Everybody, fans included, you're out here projecting what you would like to see, what you think you want to see, what is in the realm of possibility. And so when I look at the move, for me, it is an aggressive one because you're bringing on a guy that is known for aggression. And so it's saying, to your team, to your staff, to your players, to everybody involved with the program, hey, we're going to kind of take a change in direction of what our identity is going to be. And you're not going to have to talk as much about physicality and things of those nature. I think the style of defense that Muschamp employs demands it.
No doubt. And again, D Money, thank you for the super chat. Let's get to another super chat. Derek, thank you for the super chat. Says Matt coming back with Akina finally gone. I don't know what the Mac coming back. I mean, Coach Brown's been around the program for a little bit. He's just, doing his thing. But yeah,
maybe that might be saying is Derek Williams and Wardell Mack.
Oh, okay. Raptor. Okay. Derek Williams. Okay. I was thinking Mac Brown. No, I don't think, I think those, well, Wardell Mack's not in the portal. Wardell Mack is practicing with the team. So yeah, Wardell Mack is not in the portal. No, Derek Williams, I think Derek Williams is gone. I think similar to CJ Baxter, had the knee injury last year, hadn't really fully recovered, tough to get traction, probably just looking for a fresh start somewhere else. So, and it's also the other thing that got brought up too, Marcus, was, hey, does this change anything for Leonga Lafau? No, one didn't have anything to do with the other.
Right.
Leonga Lafau's departure from Texas. So I don't think you can read a whole lot into a guy hitting the portal and then all of a sudden assistant coach is gone and then a guy comes back. Maybe sometimes that happens, but that's not the case here.
Yeah, I agree. I think in this particular instance, I don't see that really being a factor at play for either of those players. And to your point, Mac's not even in the portal.
Cisco Diaz, thank you for the super chat. Says this for Matthew, best in the biz, man. Matthew has been the MVP today. Matthew and CJ both doing yeoman's work today. They've helped us get on the air and get everything running. So shout out to both those guys, doing a great job. Bandit, thank you for the super chat. So who's coaching the bowl game as of right now? From what I know, Marcus, all the defensive assistants other than Pete Kwiatkowski and Duane Akina are coaching the bowl game.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. To your point, maybe Sark's media availability, leads a little more credence to that. But if I'm him, I'm also not revealing too much because, I think he still wants to go out there and be competitive and win the game. So, we'll see, maybe a little more information about that comes out. But, to my knowledge, nobody else is not going to be with the defensive staff.
Daniel has one. This isn't a super chat. We'll get back to the super chat in just a sec. But Marcus, I know you wanted to get to this. And we'll address it. Daniel, thank you for the comment. So the main reason I think people think Sark hasn't taken accountability because outside of the running backs coach, he hasn't changed what people feel is the biggest problem: play calling in the offensive line. Look, to me, here's how I view the offense. And again, we can say Texas going all in on 2026, and they are, but with the roster volatility in college football, you can't have like a 3-year plan right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like you got to think about what are we doing to set us up for the next 12 to 13 months of maybe going into 26 and the winter 26, 27 competing for a national championship. Like you can't look at this elongated window anymore. And the other reason, Marcus, why I like the Muschamp hire, similar to, and I'll get to back to the offense in a second, and hang with us, Daniel, because we'll get to the answer. But Marcus, I think this, and Rod brought this up earlier, and I've talked about it too. you got one more year with Colin Simmons. You've got 26 with Colin Simmons, and he's off to the NFL. If I'm Sark, I got to figure out, what do I have to do to get the most out of this guy who is a legit. There are not very many guys in the country in 2026 like Colin Simmons that on any given down have the ability to take over a game, to flip a game in your favor. And if it's saying bye to PK and bringing in Will Muschamp, even if it's for 1 year to get the most out of Colin Simmons, well, if he ends up being an All-American and the Nagurski Award winner and has double-digit sacks and you win a national championship, guess what? It was worth it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And further to that, and then I'll make sure we get to Daniel again, because I thought it was an interesting comment, but I have a different perspective on it. Even in bringing somebody like him in now, right? Granted, some of my former teammates, Derek Johnson, Brian Aracko, they're around the program a lot, but for the most part, they're not around coaches that, actually coach them, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Colin can now talk to Rack and they can be speaking the same language, right? Rack can translate some things to Colin to help him as he matures from, just understanding the way that Muschamp's coach. I asked, to bring this up because, I was the one that I think, kind of started this conversation when we were talking a little earlier. And my point or my thought on it is, one, it's hard to say what a person hasn't done when we haven't seen it play out yet. So if you want to say up until this point, certain things didn't change. And so if we're talking about the regular season in hindsight, okay, fair. And I can agree with that. That being said, we're in the midst of changes right now, right? We're in the midst of a reconfiguring of the O-line. We're in the midst of potentially an offseason where Arch will actually have all of his receiving weapons, or hopefully at least the majority of them, for an entire offseason. Like, I think it's kind of continued to go under the radar. It's something we talked about a bit in preseason and then some sporadically throughout the year. But throughout the spring last year, he was without 5 of his top 6 pass catchers. Like, that stuff matters. And again, I'm going to say it in every single chat and every single conversation I get a chance to. Emmett Mosley, to me, is a stud. And that guy didn't get fully up and running until halfway into the season. So I just think that we still need to let this thing play out, because it very well may be that he's taken a look in the mirror and, made some note of things that he knows he needs to change and improve upon. And until, we see some of that, play out, it's hard to say what they have done. And again, just because it doesn't look exactly how I say it should be drawn up, or Jeff or anybody else for that matter, doesn't mean it's not happening. And so that's my only 2 cents. I think there's ways you can take accountability and make changes without firing everybody, without having to go out and hire a new OC and just overhaul every little bitty thing, right? Like, I think it's a much more nuanced approach and conversation that obviously will carry on throughout the spring, summer, and then into next fall.
And again, it's not that it's about being right or wrong, but it's about Sark taking stock of what's best for this program. And he's the head coach. He gets paid a lot of money to make those decisions. And if his decision is, you know what, the offensive line will be better if we attack it, we're aggressive in the portal, get Kyle Flood better personnel. He trusts Kyle Flood to coach the offensive line. And, beyond that, when we talk about play calling, I think there's 2 aspects to it, Marcus. You kind of hit on one. One, you got to figure out how to run the football. Like, it wasn't even feast or famine like it was in 24. Like, it was starve it, and then you managed to kind of nibble a little bit. Like, your run game was bad. And some of it was injuries, some of it was personnel, but it was what it was. It's the worst run game Sark, I think, has ever had any college offense he's been associated with. That was the worst run game he's had. They're going to attack the portal. You bring in Jabbar Jalouk. We know they're going to go look for running backs in the portal. Because if you don't have that offensive balance, man, when you play teams with like talent, an Ohio State, a Georgia, an Alabama that can match your talent, it doesn't matter what kind of passing game you have. If you can't run the football and you're one-dimensional, you become very easy to defend. There's that part of it. The other part, too, I think we need to remember this about play calling specifically. Greg Davis became a better play caller the better Vince Young got and the better Colt McCoy got. And whoever was calling the plays for Tom Herman, they became a better play caller the better Sam Ehlinger got. So to me, it's about doing whatever you can to build around Arch for this 1 year. And yeah, there's a ton of risk. Go look at what happened. We got 2 examples, Marcus, of what happens when you go all in for a year. You've got the Ohio State example last year, which it ended up working out for them. You get the Penn State example this year, which it didn't work out, and James Franklin got fired 6 games into it. So again, there's no guarantee that it's going to work, but this is what I think Sark has earned the benefit of the doubt to do is evaluate this program and say, these are the moves that I think are going to get us over the hump.
And since we are, at this point in time, living in hypothetical land, right? I hate doing the if on, looking back on things, but since we're projecting forward, I'll play the if game for a minute here. Regardless of who they choose to get out the portal, right? You have to assume that there's the high quality, guys that could come in and play right away. Okay. But then, all right, well, what if they don't pick the guys that everybody thought we should have got, but those guys end up being great? We've talked before. Ohio State went and plucked a guy from Rice and he didn't play for him. So it doesn't always work out. There's other schools around the programs where you do see that. But the other thought I have is, what if some of these young guys just end up developing and are good? Of course, you don't want to bank on that. And so, again, I'm not suggesting you don't address this in the portal. I'm just also saying add to the equation that there is the possibility that maybe they were right in some of their evaluations with some of these younger guys. And as they continue to grow, as they've had some time, to gain good weight and work in the weight room, that there's some configurations that could work with whomever they do bring in that does, make this offensive line, much more than serviceable and much, certainly better than this past year. Because certainly, figured some stuff out towards the end of the year, but now you're projecting forward. So, I've heard some, great things about some of the young guys. I know they're really happy with Kibble's development. And so I just, again, I'm one of those that's kind of cautioned to see how some of it starts to play out, what things are beginning to look like in the spring and in the offseason.
It's crazy, Marcus, how college roster building in college football. I wrote this the other day over on TexasFootball.com. Roster building in college is a lot like the NFL now, where you're seeing guys, like a Leonga Lafau, CJ Baxter, that are going into their last year. Well, you know what? If you don't perform up to par, that NIL offer you get, it may be a drastic decrease in what you've got the year before. And I'm not saying anything specific. I'm just using those guys as an example. Basically, your upperclassmen now are how NFL teams would look at first round draft picks and rookies. When you get to the end of that rookie contract, do we want to extend this guy and continue to invest knowing the price tag is going to be heftier? Or are we content to let them walk in free agency and start over? And, now you've got the deal where, to your point, it's like, okay, whereas NFL teams, it's like, we got this young guy that we took in the 5th round a couple years ago. Do we think he's ready, or do we need to go address this in free agency and bring in a stopgap? That's basically what the portal is. The portal is it's we know it's free agency, but in terms of managing your roster, it's exactly like an NFL offseason.
Man, this is where, you're getting me close to my soapbox. If you guys go out there and look, this week I've seen some videos from PJ Fleck and Jeff Traylor kind of talking about all of this. And some of the conversation is around a lot of these guys get lured into the portal because, again, they can't talk directly with the schools. So they have their agents doing things, what the agent's job do to get them the most money possible, right? So there's situations where a kid goes out and says, hey, I want 300 to come back this year. And then the team's like, all right, well, we'll give you 250. And that's because that's what the team's evaluated them at. That's what they feel like this player's, number is worth, within the context of any number of other things that we have no clue about. And the kid is like, no, I'm going to go try and get 300 somewhere else. And then he tries to go somewhere else and they only want to give him 200. Right. So who was that on? Was that on the team for not giving him his initial number? Was that on the kid for not, being more realistic about what his value was at? Like, it's hard to say. And so as much as we talk about the portal, the other thing that we often talk about that people just kind of tend to blindly overlook is way more guys go in the portal than actually land somewhere better. And so it's a very imperfect science. And so as much as it is like the NFL, what it's not is there's not a salary cap. There's not as clear of a way to figure out exactly who's making what. Like, generally speaking, what different quarterbacks are making what across the country. A lot of these numbers are fake, man. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it straight up. Like, I have friends whose kids have been recruited, friends whose kids are in college and are names that, everybody would know. And they laugh sometimes when they see some of this stuff. And we get around talking about it because it is, what the headline is. And so said this. But nobody can prove it. Right. And so everybody knows that. And the other thing I would say about it, too, is that as you start looking at, how some of this stuff plays out, I've been laughing at USC announcing all these re-signings, right? Well, A&M did it, and the way they did it with Craver is highest paid receiver in A&M history.
They let straight up call it a contract extension.
It's an extension, but you still don't know the number, right? So it's like these guys talk amongst themselves. And so the other flip side of this coin is, all right, I go out and I pay this kid, and my locker room knows what he's making, but he doesn't end up performing anywhere near that. Now, I can pretty well tell you, like, there's not going to be anybody in A&M's locker room that can balk at what Craver's getting, because he's worth every penny, whatever that is, right? And there's not going to be a receiver on that team, that can really make an argument that they should be getting more than him. But what happens when somebody legit could, right? So again, there's a bunch of stuff at play. And so I'll step back off the soapbox here, but I just think there's a lot more at play when it comes to the portal than the average person is aware of. And a lot of us approach it as if it's just point, click, get who you want, whatever the number is, shouldn't matter. And then I'm gonna leave you with this. I said I was going to get off my soapbox. I'm almost off. When we look at some of the other schools that take these huge transfer classes at different points in time, I would challenge you to go look at their roster the year prior to them doing that. More times than not, they didn't have better options on that roster. More times than not, they didn't even have the depth that, places like a Texas and Ohio State or whomever, is in those upper echelons that has to pay a lot for their retention. Texas Tech wasn't having to do that last year. Like, let's just be honest. They weren't having to pay a significant amount of their money to retain guys from the prior team. They were able to go out and pay a whole bunch of guys and say, hey, you're all going to start, right? But, I've said it before, I can't do that if Colin Simmons is one of my bookends, because he should be getting more than damn near anybody, if not the most, outside of Arch. So it just, it's nuanced. And I just think that that's something that we all have to get used to, is that a lot of this is still the Wild Wild West, and everybody's trying to find a different way to go about it.
I think I could talk about this now because neither one of them is at Texas, and the Rodney Terry is no longer the basketball coach. But when Texas recruit, and again, it's basketball, so it's apples and pomegranates comparing it, but the same thought process applies, Marcus. Like Texas recruited JT Toppin out of the portal, but when you start looking at NIL, it's like, no, we've already established that Trey Johnson is going to be the highest paid guy on this roster. Like, he's going to make X amount of dollars, and that's where our money's going to go to, because you put in so much time to recruit him, and for better or worse, you decided that, hey, we're going to stop here. We're not going above this number. This is what we have allotted, and take it or leave it kind of thing. Yeah. And that's, sometimes, and hey, credit JT Toppin got a payday from Tech. Great for him. But, I think that's where you get into, Marcus. It's like, well, they didn't even try to get this guy.
Right.
Well, you don't know that. It may have been that this is, and again, similar to the NFL model, you may have a certain portion of your cap allocated to offensive line, and a certain portion allocated to receiver, and a certain portion allocated to quarterback. And it may be an off-ball linebacker where you say, you know what, we're not paying that for an off-ball linebacker. We're not going to rob Peter to pay Paul. We're not going to be wanting at receiver or corner because we spent X amount of dollars on a linebacker. And it's just general, but it applies. That's what these coaches are dealing with.
Yeah, man. It reminds me of, for me, a lot of people say there's a Jay-Z quote for everything. I always say there's a Wire quote for everything. And, Marlo was on the stand. He said, the game is the game. And that's really what it is. It's everybody is trying to do what they feel is best for them. Agents are trying to get their guys the most money. It's no shock if I see these big numbers float out. Well, I wonder who put them out. I could do this for days, but I agree with you. So, yeah.
All right, we'll get back to the supers here in just a minute. Let's go ahead and thank a couple more sponsors here, our fine sponsors in all Texas football. South Point Dodge, Texas football fans, score an easy extra point right now when you get to the point at South Point Dodge. South Point Dodge has over 600 vehicles in stock, including the all-new 2025 Ram 1500. Get the real deal today and drive away in an all-new Ram that's proven to last. Plus, get employee incentive pricing right now. That's right. You pay what the employees pay at South Point Dodge. That, folks, is a real deal. So score big today at South Point Dodge. Check them out off I-35 in South Austin or at southpointdodge.com. Get to the point at South Point Dodge. And I want to say thank you and give a big shout out to our friends over at SeatGeek. Hey, whatever, whether it's a concert or a basketball game, whatever, college football playoff game, NFL game. Tickets make really good presence around the holidays. That's why you need to go give SeatGeek a try. With over 35 million downloads, SeatGeek is the #1 rated ticketing app. There are more than 70,000 events listed on SeatGeek, including concerts, sporting events, festivals, and more. College and NFL, like I said, are in full swing. The NBA is back. And you can get World Cup tickets at SeatGeek. Don't forget, there will be World Cup games in Texas this summer. I've used SeatGeek before for Major League Baseball games, NBA games, concerts. SeatGeek has your back. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know you're getting a good deal. So look for the green dots. Again, I've done this before. It really works out. Green means good, red means bad. Plus, every ticket is backed by their buyer guarantee. And we've got a code. You can use the code OTF10. That's OTF10 for 10% off your next set of tickets at SeatGeek. That's 10% off any tickets at SeatGeek with the promo code OTF10. Make sure you click the link in the description to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. And again, big thank you to SeatGeek for their sponsorship of On Texas Football. All right, let's get back to the supers. Killer, thank you for the super chat. Said, I like the Muschamp reunion. Sark's offenses thrive when the defense is getting turnovers and TFLs. He gets loose when that happens. Sark could get exposed or look like the smartest guy with this. Yeah, again, like there is no guarantee that this is going to work, that this is just going to be the add water and stir. There's a risk to it. There's a risk involved, but hey, this may be me being naive, Marcus, and my naivete can get the best of me at times, but I feel like Sark has earned the right to say, this is what I feel is the move to get us over the hump. I feel like he's earned that right.
I said this. I'm a big fantasy football player, and I said that, and I forget that it's like semifinals and games going on right now. So I need to, once we get done here, I need to see what's going on with my teams. But I always say in fantasy football, right? Like there's certain guys that, maybe you're going to take a chance starting somebody this week, but like I can live losing playing with certain guys in my lineup, right? Like this year, I'm going to start Jonathan Taylor every week. You're not going to convince me to put anybody else in. I can live with losing that way. I think, this is a version of that in that, and that was a really poor analogy, but stay with me here. I can live with, it maybe not working out if we're trying to do the polar opposite of some of the things that felt most problematic on that side of the ball. For me, I hated seeing the guys playing off, right? Like it just, I wasn't a fan of it. It didn't make sense to me. I didn't like it. That's not how Muschamp coaches, right? There were times where I had questions about guys tackling. In that interview that, I referenced earlier, he was, talking about how he's huge on making sure you don't lose leverage on the ball and run your feet on contact. If you can't tackle, you can't play, right? And he was talking about that across the board. Then he started breaking down positionally. And one of the things he said was, and for DVs, play the ball as a defensive back. If you can't play the deep ball, you're dead in the water. I felt like after every game, when we would come and talk about these things, whether it was in during the live watch, if it was, immediately after, if it was on Monday morning, coffee and football, if it was this Thursday night show any of us were doing, one of the main complaints that any number of guys had, especially when Rod is on, a lot of fans would ask him, what's with these guys and how they play the ball? Muschamp requires it, right? He coaches to it. And so I can't say what's happening or is not happening, but I can tell you if a guy like Orfeh is retained, who's a young talent that I think they think the world of, and I expect him to be retained, like that type of style marries well. And I think that he can learn a lot as well as impart a lot that maybe for whatever reason, some of the way that PK went about doing things, and that configuration with Akina just didn't work out. So I agree, with this comment that, again, I said an agent of chaos is how he coaches, right? He's going to want to ratchet things up. And so think about, for all the complaints any and everybody had about the defense, at one point in time this year, they were still, in the upper echelons of, the folks or teams that led the country in sacks, right? Mm-hmm. Well, imagine how much better that might have looked if Colin was moving forward. And I forget it. I'll say it poorly, but, Rod always states the quote that Muschamp had, about like thoroughbreds or something, not going backwards, right?
So you don't like, train a thoroughbred to run backwards.
Exactly, man. So like there's just some stuff. And so I agree. Sark could end up, hey, this move could completely not work. But since we're living in the if world of projecting forward, what if it does, man? Like, what if you go from, a pretty decent defense, week in and week out, year in, year out, to like back to true elite days, what if we're top 3 defense, unquestionably in damn near every category? Like, you can't tell me at that point that you haven't upgraded. So as we project forward, I don't know. I'm excited about the possibilities.
No, and this is Sark. I'll use another quote from a different sport. I was talking to Simeon Wilcher on a basketball team before the season started, and he played again. You talk about a guy that played for somebody hard-nosed, played for Rick Pitino at St. John's, and like, hey, what was the one thing from Coach Pitino that stood out? He said, "If you do what you've always done, you're gonna get what you've always got." Yeah. And this is Sark saying, "Yeah, what we've always got, what we got, it's been good, but it's not good enough." And I'm gonna roll the dice and see if this pays off. Thank you for the super chat. G George with the super chat. Thank you. Said, I love the Coach Boom hire, but I feel like if we're keeping the defense to such a high standard, which in recent years has been better than we need the same standard for the offense. No excuses. I 100% agree with that. Like this, Steve Sarkisian's a lot of things, Marcus. He's not stupid. Like, he knows what the optics are. He knows you got to get the run game fixed. You got to get the O-line fixed. And man, if you don't at least get to the point where you're playing for a national championship with Arch Manning as your quarterback, he knows there's going to be a lot of questions about whether or not he's the guy for this place.
Yeah. We mentioned it earlier. I don't see a world where he's not looking in the mirror, where he's not turning over every stone, to make sure that he is putting together the best possible, offensive unit to take advantage of having Arch, in the next development of his career. Like I just, to your point, like, he's not stupid, so I have a really hard time with the concept that he's not making any changes. He's not, taking a hard look at himself. Like, I absolutely think he's doing all of those things. What that ends up looking like in its final iteration still remains to be seen. And I know that's not fun, to say like, hey, you guys are going to kind of have to wait to see what this looks like. But I absolutely, agree, George. Like, no, at the end of the day, like, there won't be any excuses. And I think that is where, once we see some of these moves that are made in the portal, how this coaching staff finishes out, what some of the guys look like in the bowl game, and then we get into spring ball in the summer, that's when some of this, will begin to shake out. But there's nothing about me that says Sark is going into this offseason thinking he can keep his offense the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's you'd be foolish to think you can. And they're going to add they're going to address O-line in the portal. They're going to address running back in the portal. Speaking of running backs, Trey Wisner, unless something's happened in the last hour, still has not publicly announced his decision. As of
I'm still rooting for him to come back.
As of earlier today, CJ's been pretty in tune with that. All 3 options, portal, NFL draft, or return to Texas, all 3 options were on the table earlier today. Jack Injuries is still going through making a decision. Jelani McDonald's got a decision to make, and that actually brings us to our next super chat from Rocky P. Said, excited to see what Muschamp can do with Spence and McDonald. They are built for a more attacking style. Yeah, Jelani McDonald, can do some of that. I'll say this though, when you talk about like Brad, I think of a guy like Brad Spence and the kind of rushers Muschamp has had. Like I go back to when Muschamp was a DC at Auburn, Marcus. So I hope I don't lose anybody. But I'm going to go down the Will Muschamp rabbit hole. He had a guy at Auburn named Quentin Groves who was like an undersized, like by NFL standards, was not a defensive end, but the guy just had such a kind of like Brad Spence, just had a natural feel for pass rushing that you could not coach, and played with a tenacity and an aggressiveness. I'll tell you this, you're not going to be soft and play for Will Muschamp. And, talking to the guys that were there that first spring, you talk to a Roy Miller, you talk to a Brian Arakpo, you talk to a Lamar Houston, they'll tell you like, hey, you figured out real quick, like the intensity level, you thought it was here. No, it's really here, and you better reach it. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah, man.
Has adjusted.
I'm smiling because you mentioned Roy Miller, and this is something I wanted to try to get back to that interview, because what I liked about that interview that I watched was, excuse me, it wasn't like placating to a Texas crowd, right? It was just the two hosts and Muschamp, and they were just kind of riffing, and they would ask him some questions at the end of the interview, and his answers were very interesting to me. One of the questions he asked, have you coached anyone that's matched your level of intensity? First word out of his mouth was Roy Miller. They didn't say it at Texas. They didn't say, when you were, in this particular year, or when your defense, the first name he mentioned was Roy Miller. And he said, at times I thought we had to calm him down. There was another time where they asked him, of the DBs that you coached, which one surprised you the most? First name out of his mouth was Earl Thomas. Now, the way he phrased it was, hey, I've coached 9 first-round DBs, right? So again, we talk about what a guy like this brings to the table. Why would any defensive back not listen to him? When you talk about the recruiting trail, why would you not want to play for a guy like that? But of all the guys that he coached, the first name that came out of his mouth was Earl Thomas. And so I think when you talk about his eye for talent and how he chooses to deploy them, I know there are a lot of people, maybe even myself included, were kind of wondering initially, like, wait a minute, your choice is to run Earl Thomas and Blake Gideon out at safety. Like, at that point, they weren't proven to be what they became, but he saw something in them, and he saw a way in which he could deploy them in his defense that could, maximize them. So I certainly think like guys like with the Spence and McDonald are ripe for that. But, some of the younger DBs that I mentioned already, I mean, it's just the possibilities are endless, and we'll get a lot of time to talk more about that once we kind of get a full idea of what the final configuration of this personnel is going to look like. But I think even if you weren't built for attacking, you're going to be forced to do that if you're going to play for Will Muschamp. So I'm interested to see the level that he can take any number of guys to.
Marcus, this clip we're about to play, we played it back when Rod and myself and Matt Butler were doing the Longhorn Blitz. We actually played this clip for Lamar Houston, who cracked up because he was in the locker room when this happened. This gives you a little taste of what it's like to be in a halftime meeting with Will Muschamp.
Let's go. Everybody eyes up here. Look, they are getting this set right here, right? And they're running zone G and they're running chop. If we call it chop, we got to get there. The bucket's got to get there and get flat. Corner's got to come through. The safety fits outside. Will's got to be here. Does everybody see that? Gap control. Everybody just do your job. You understand that?
And we love talking about Muschamp punching whiteboards, but Marcus, that's why he's, again, talking to guys that play for him. I don't know that of coaches at Texas, of all of the guys in my lifetime that have cycled through there, I don't know there's ever been a better motivator of men than Will Muschamp.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think he just knows how to get the most out of his guys. He has a way of coaching players hard, but they love it. Even again, if you watch anything that you can find about Georgia the last several years, those players truly loved the coaching they got from him, because he's built very much like Kirby. Let's be honest, right? Like they're kind of cut from the same cloth. Kirby actually coached under Muschamp, at Valdosta State at one point. So it's like these guys go way back. And when you talk about what is required in the SEC and the things that people have complained about from a defensive standpoint, again, understand that things have to get figured out on the offense. But I mean, find me a guy that's going to be better served to be able to correct those things. And I'm just really excited about what he can bring to the table with that intensity. But that intensity comes because he has drilled this stuff into these guys in a way that he knows they know what's right? Like those guys that were in that locker room knew they were supposed to fit better. It was never a question of were they prepared enough? Was the game plan sound? Did they have questions about what Muschamp was asking them to do? So they were okay with being held accountable and held to task. And I think that's what you can expect from him. And then that's when you see greatness truly, rise out of guys that maybe you didn't expect to, or a next level for the guys that you were planning on relying on. And even when you go down to a freshman to be Tyler Atkinson, he was being recruited by Georgia and was around Muschamp a lot. He's one of the guys that you see across social media that was excited about the hire. Yep. So Again, it's not to crap on PK and anything that he did. It's just a different style, a different voice, and one that I think has an opportunity to be very successful.
I think that's key to drive home, Marcus, before we get back to the supers. Because again, and I said the same thing about Chad Scott. And sometimes there are some times where you hire somebody on staff and it doesn't work. It's just a bad fit or whatever. And it's not that these coaches are bad coaches. I don't think anybody would say Pete Kwiatkowski's a bad coach. His resume tells you the exact opposite. But it gets to a point where, man, the head man is in charge. And if he decides it's not a fit that aligns with his vision of where the program is going, it's not saying Sark is right or wrong, but you're the boss man. You make the final call, and he made the final call that's not the way they wanted to go anymore. So it ain't personal. Sometimes it's just, hey, this didn't work. Not every business relationship or anything that ends has to end with in a blood feud. Sometimes just be, hey, they didn't work out. Just go your separate ways. And I think PK is going to be fine. Again, whether he ends up catching on, if Lincoln Riley ends up having a defensive coordinator opening or wherever, I think he's going to catch on and be fine. Bobby Turner said another side suggested Muschamp made DC the bowl game. That I don't know. We'll find that out tomorrow. Again, Sark's going to have a press conference tomorrow at 11:15, and we'll get some of that sorted out tomorrow. I would assume Johnny Nansen would call the defense for the bowl game, but I don't know. That's just me speculating at this point. Derek, thank you for the super chat. We'll get back to the last couple of supers we got. From a locker room mentality, does bringing in tough coaches with Will and Jabbar Jaluk make a big impact? Y'all think Sark is frustrated with offensive plays per games due to PK's bend, but don't break D? I think if you bring in tough coaches, it can make an impact because, again, go back to that 2008 offseason going from 07 to 08. You bring in Will Muschamp and Major Applewhite. Like enough guys have told me that I believe it, Marcus, a lot of things changed from a mentality standpoint that offseason at Texas. So,
when you were right earlier when you said I told you that one offseason was the worst of my life. It was. And a big part of it was because of the style of coaching that came in. They accepted nothing but excellence. And even though the majority of that impact was from the defensive side of the ball, make no mistake about it, the offense began to embody that type of identity, right? Like getting coached like that and hearing that in the offseason workouts was right up Casey Studdard's alley, even if he wasn't on the defensive side of the ball. It was right up Justin Blaylock's alley, even if he wasn't on the defensive side of the ball. I think it makes a huge difference. I think the practices get a lot chippier, right? I think, guys understand to an even another degree what is going to be expected of them week in and week out. And I think it's an opportunity to just rise, the level of play for everybody all along. I don't know so much if Sark is frustrated about the offensive plays per game when you talk about the bend but don't break, but I certainly do think, if you can get the ball, back more and be able to dictate games a bit more from a defensive standpoint, that would make any offensive play caller happy. And I think I even saw, someone earlier in the chat even say something to the effect of, hey, look, we're talking about the mentality and stuff. How's that different than Akina? Well, all due respect to Coach Akina, I don't know what the exact age difference is, but again, I said earlier, Muschamp is 54 years old. Like this guy still has some stuff in the tank. Part of why, he chose to kind of step away, for a year was to make sure that he could spend the time he felt he needed to with his family and with his children. And he's done that. And so I think he's just kind of itching to get back to it. So I think that's where you see some of the differences, just in age alone. He's still a guy that has a lot of ball left in him. And, like I said, I'm trying not to repeat myself too much, man. But I think it's a pretty cool deal we got going here.
Yeah. And I think, again, best of luck to PK. I think as we get to this chat from Justin Yarbrough, thank you for the super chat. So, Marcus, what style of defense do you think Will Muschamp will run? 4-2-5, 3-4, 4-3. I was in high school last time he was at Texas, and I love the hire. Best of luck to PK. Just want to reinforce that last part. Pete Kwiatkowski did a great job while he was at Texas. I mean, his defenses were good enough. Marcus got you to the cusp of playing for a national championship twice. So, again, hats off to PK. He did his job. But as far as styles, look, he's been an even front guy for the most part. But today, you got to be multiple. You got to be able to have multiple fronts, multiple coverages. You you can't just be in one static defense anymore.
Yeah, if I were, having to pick a playbook in EA Sports, NCAA football to describe it, I'd probably do like 4-3 multiple, but you're going to see versions of all of it. Excuse me. It's going to be, highly based on his personnel. That is one of the things I've always loved about Muschamp defenses as well, is like he's going to play to the strengths of that personnel. And he knows he has some guys that can get after the passer. I think he's going to do everything he can to get the best, however many guys he needs on the field to do that. I'm looking for a huge jump for a guy like Justice Terry, a continued, upward trajectory for Lance Jackson, right? And then just, man, on top of the way that Colin got snubbed in a lot of these awards, find me a guy that's going to be better to, in his ear, like, hey, man, they didn't think you were good enough for first team SEC. What are you going to do about it, right? Like, and then put him in a position to be able to do something about it. Those are the type of intricacies about this hire that I truly love.
And that's going back to his first stint at Texas. Part of the reason why Brian Arakpo became Brian Arakpo and Sergio Kendall left as an All-American, and Henry Melton went from the backfield to the defensive line and ended up being a draft pick. And Lamar Houston went from a high school running back to a second-round draft pick as a defensive tackle and played in the NFL for a number of years. That was Will Muschamp had the biggest hand in all of that, Marcus. I mean, he took those guys and developed them into they were physically gifted athletes. He made them into great defensive players.
I was looking over to my left here because I was trying to see if there was something I could get to maybe on our last ad read. If there's another, I can try and grab it. But there's a strength and conditioning book we got one summer. And Mad Dog used to always have different photos of guys working out. And there's a photo I want to try and show everybody. If it's not tonight, I'll do it on Monday morning or another show sometime, of Arakpo, right? And when Rak first came in, you would have mistaken him for a wide receiver, right? But part of his development wasn't just solely Mad Dog in the weight room. It was also Muschamp fine-tuning and showing him, hey, this is what your build should look like for the type of player you are to get where you want to go. And Rak, he listened to every word, right? And so a guy like Colin Simmons, I can't imagine wouldn't do similar. And so it's I think it's a very special thing for these guys to have an opportunity to be coached by him.
Marcus, if you want to look for that real quick, we got a couple more super chats to get to. All right, Cube said, I don't hate these players. Actually, with Marcus, you may want to hang out for this one because this is up there about earlier. Said, all right, Cube said, I don't hate these players getting all they can. Any one of us would do the same at our jobs. This is America. If capitalism is good, then yeah.
So the part of that is, it's similar to that saying of know thyself, right? If you're a player trying to get all you can, then you better have pretty well dialed in what your worth is, right? And to some degree, your worth is really what somebody is willing to pay you. But if you think that you should be X dollar and the school you're at or the school you're trying to get to actually thinks you're at Y, then that gets to some of this stuff does just come down to negotiation. And at some point, and I think this is what Fleck went pretty in depth in the time that I saw the video of him speaking about some of this stuff. Part of like negotiations and deals is knowing when to walk away. I have an uncle that loves just like shopping for cars, even if he's not in the market for buying. Like he just likes to kind of haggle. And at some point, sometimes he just walks away to see what, the guy is going to do. But he's comfortable knowing if he makes that choice, then so be it. So as these players are trying to get all they can, more power to them, right? The coaches do it. Everybody throughout the sport does it at some level, but you also have to know, one, from the player side or, the coaching personnel, staff, whatever side of things, when you're going to walk away. And so if you're trying to get everything you can, then you also have to know that there's a possibility that you're shooting for a number that is really beyond what you're worth. And then for some of the rare, air guys that truly, truly deserve every penny, they know that they're in a position to do that. Well, I can guarantee you the majority of them are not. And I think I even saw Vic Schaefer talking about this. There was some kind of like women's round ball forum, and he was talking about how, some of the numbers that these players are asking for are just insane to him. And so there's a select few that he agrees, yep, you're going to get that number. And the rest, it's like, oh no, we'll give you this. And if you don't, think that, that's worth it, so be it. So there's two sides of that coin.
Yeah, no doubt. Rocky P says, I want to just thank PK for his hard work. He did an amazing job and brought the Texas D back to top level. I hope he gets the appreciation he deserves. Boy, and going back to his first year, look, I've said this before, I'll say it again. Just one of the many things that I kind of rehash, but it's worth rehashing. Rod Babers helped me realize many years ago, look, you can get by, you can mask deficiencies you have on offense. If you have a great scheme paired with a quarterback that really can thrive within the scheme, you can mask some deficiencies. No further than 2008, 2009 Texas, man, Colt, as it turned out, masked a lot of deficiencies you had. But if you don't have players on defense, you're going to get exposed at some point. And go look at the roster in 2021 on defense and go look at it now. And I'll say this is the best thing I can say, Marcus, about the Texas defense under PK. Even you go back to year one, as the season went on, especially, I go back in that last game against Kansas State, to me, they finished 5-7. That was kind of the de facto bowl game on Black Friday. You watch that game, you're like, you know what? Ja'Day Barron's gotten better the more he's played. Jalen Ford's gotten better the more he's played. Byron Murphy, the more he's played, he's gotten better. And Marvin Overshown's getting better. And guys developed under PK. That staff, he deserves a lot of credit for heading up that staff that took the roster they inherited from the previous regime and turning a lot of those guys into all conference guys and all Americans and draft picks and first round picks. They deserve credit for that, for sure.
Yeah, man. Look, I'm celebrating Muschamp, but in no way am I celebrating, PK being fired. And again, I do it in that manner because I think there's a little bit more to it than, what we'll ever actually hear publicly. But excuse me again, sorry. I think that he did an amazing job, but I also don't want people to forget, as fickle as we all can be at times, there was a number of folks calling for his head before Nansen arrived. Hell, the other day there was people in the chat still calling for PK to be fired, and I was trying to defend him because there wasn't a world where I thought Muschamp was a possibility, right? And so I absolutely agree. Rocky, I think that he deserves his flowers, and at the same time, like we said earlier, game is the game, and you corrected me. You're right. It was Omar. It was not Marlowe on that one. And with that, I'm grateful for his time, and I look forward to what the next iteration of the Texas defense looks like.
Last super chat here, D Money. Thank you for the super chat. So you guys think there could be a coaching change at special teams? That side has been lacking recently. I will say this. Shout out to the Football Writers Association of America for naming Ryan Niblett first team All-American. That
finally somebody gets it right.
Texas is not in the CFP discussion up until the very end without Ryan Niblett. If he didn't do what he did against Kentucky and Mississippi State in the return against Oklahoma. And part of the reason why Kirby kicked the onside kick in the Georgia game was like, I'm not kicking a Ryan Niblett. I'm crazy. I'm not putting the ball in that guy's hands and letting him change the game. As far as a change at special teams coach, look, here's the deal with special teams. As long as you're more boom than bust, then to me, Marcus, sometimes you just got to live with the fact that you may get out schemed, you may get caught off guard, but your return units are some of the best in the country. You're pretty good at covering kicks. Again, really good move getting Mason Shipley out of the portal. So has Jeff Banks been perfect? Yeah. Has Jeff Banks been perfect? No, but it's been the pros outweigh the cons to me with Jeff Banks as special teams coach.
Yeah. There were some issues prior to coming into this season, and I think he addressed them. So again, everybody's going to have, I wish, to the beginning half of the season, first of all, we were all freaking out anytime Niblett was trying to field a punt or was back there. And I remember a large contingent of people being pissed that we weren't trying to block more kicks. And then by the end of the season, that was do whatever you can to set up a return for Ryan Niblett. So, folks are a bit finicky at times on some of those things. I'm not, really overly pressed by special teams. And again, the better players that you're able to get, the better special teams get. And so I think, as they continue to add to this roster, that'll be another thing that you'll see take effect on the field.
All right, Marcus, Thank you for the time tonight, man. The knowledge and
Yes, sir.
expertise is always welcome. What's your next appearance here on the channel? Is that Monday on Coffee and Football?
I think it's Monday on Coffee and Football. Yeah, should be back Monday on Coffee and Football.
Get you a cup of coffee and some knowledge with Marcus and Bobby and Jerry and Blake on Monday morning. Hey, I want to thank our sponsors one more time for this edition of On Texas Football. Von Lane, our lead sponsor here tonight. Also want to thank our friends over at Hayes City Store, one of my favorite spots in the greater Austin area. Our friends over at South Point Dodge and our friends over at SeatGeek for sponsoring the show tonight. Again, if you missed it earlier, Sark is scheduled to have a press conference tomorrow morning at 11:15. So we'll be looking. We've got Coffee and Football coming up tomorrow morning. CJ and I will have something from that press conference. Got the Friday afternoon live stream tomorrow.
Oh, actually, it might end up tomorrow afternoon too, Jeff.
Okay.
I forget. Sometimes I jump in on Friday afternoons too, so we'll see.
You know, Marcus, whenever you want to jump in, it's fine with me. I'll speak for Bobby and everybody else. Whenever you want to jump in, you just go right ahead. So yeah, we got plenty of content coming out here on the channel, plenty of content over at ontexasfootball.com. Speaking of which, if you're not a member over at ontexasfootball.com, you can get over to the site right now and sign up using the promo code OTFOG. There it is on the screen. OTFOG is the promo code. That'll get you 1 year of access at ontexasfootball.com for just $39.95. Make sure that you like this video and that you're subscribed to the On Texas Football YouTube channel. That way, whether it's here on the channel or on the site, you're not missing any of our Longhorn coverage and a lot of breaking news today. So if you're a subscriber to the YouTube page, you are on top of all of it as we were bringing it to you live. Hey, and big shout out to Matthew behind the scenes for doing outstanding work today. And I want to give a big shout out to CJ Vogel too. CJ Blake Monroe doing his thing too. So our behind the scenes guys working really, really hard. And thank you guys for the love, the super chats, and contributing to the chat tonight. And with that, that'll do it. Again, if you got anything else, you can address it to the guys at Coffee and Football first thing in the morning. For Marcus, for Matthew behind the scenes, for the entire On Texas Football staff, I'm Jeff Howe. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. And until next time, welcome.